Today's Mind Behind the Music, we sit down with legendary bassist Dave Ellefson, founding member of Megadeth and the driving force behind some of thrash metal's most iconic records. From his work with Kings of Thrash and Ellefson-Soto to hosting the David Ellefson Show, he continues to shape heavy metal music while inspiring generations of musicians. And it's an honor to have you here today, Dave. Welcome.
Thank you, John.
Yeah, thanks, man. So you've had a remarkable journey in music, obviously. What's the earliest memory that made you pick up the bass guitar?
Well, I grew up a Kiss fan. I mean, that's probably that. Bachman Turner Overdrive was probably the band that got me to buy a bass guitar. The Not Fragile album. The needle drop opens with a bass riff on the song Not Fragile. I didn't even know. I just opened up the gatefold Not Fragile album, and Randy Bachman's playing a Strat. Fred Turner's playing a black Rickenbacker 4001. Blair Thornton's playing a Gibson SG. And I just thought the Strat and the Rickenbacker were the coolest, So there's something, I don't know why the bass called to me, I think your instruments find you. You don't find your instrument. I think all of this stuff is divine, my soul is in agreement with going out, hunter gatherer kind of stuff, you know what I mean? And my whole everything about me wants to sort of always go out and be part of that next opportunity. And some of it happens here in this room, in this office, or in recording studios, or wherever. But, for the most part, I'm a man on the move, and that's just how I'm wired. That's all part of the story of me as a musician, as a bit of a troubadour, if you will. That's just kind of what it is,
So you weren't a Paul McCartney fan for the Rickenbacker. That's surprising. You were more of that 70s genre with Kiss.
Yeah. 70s music for me, starting with Sweet Ballroom Blitz. I mean, that was probably the first song I heard on the radio.
Yeah, that album is underrated. I heard that when I was a kid. And that's like,
yeah. I mean, Desolation Boulevard. During COVID, I did the Ellefson No Cover album, and I basically picked the covers that I liked. They weren't necessarily the hits; they were the covers I liked. Like, Love Me Like a Reptile by Motorhead. We covered Sweet FA off the Desolation Boulevard album.
Yeah, that's a good song.
We covered Not Fragile. We did the song Sheer Heart Attack by Queen, which, by the way, is not on the Sheer Heart Attack album. It's on News of the World. So, that was where, it was fun to cover those songs that shaped me growing up, as a kid. And, I just saw Sweets in Europe a few months back, and it was just such a treat to see. Andy's the only one still out there doing it. And they sounded great. They played all the hits, Fox on the Run, 16s, all the stuff, you know what I mean? So I'm a big fan of theirs. Obviously BTO, then straight into Kiss, then into Van Halen, Boston, Aerosmith, Foreigner, basically American FM hard rock was really what rocked my world,
You have a favorite bass player that really, besides BTO, I mean, anybody that's really, really influenced you? I mean, how did you get into, that from that, thrash metal?
There's kind of two questions there. One, do I have a favorite? Look, I love Steve Harris's, not just his bass playing, but his songwriting, and probably more than anything, he's the leader of the band, that he composes. And I don't know exactly how he composes. If he starts with the bass, if he's also a killer guitar player, I don't know really what it is. It's kind of remains a bit of a secret to all of us. But, the fact that he is such a driving force, he's a storyteller. Similar would probably be Neil Peart, because he was such a great lyricist with Rush.
Yeah.
I certainly love Geddy Lee. I'm savoring the very end of his memoir right now. I loved reading it. What I realized reading Alex Van Halen's book, Geddy Lee's book, anybody's book, we're all the same. Like, and there's so many similarities between all of us, because I think not only do we think alike, are we sort of, we're sort of hatched out of the egg as a certain type of bird, if you will, and birds of a feather flock together. You know what I mean? It's like musicians, we find each other, And I think in the pursuit of our profession, it's a similar road traveled together, the building blocks of building a career, what we go through in our early days, the days when it starts to be real as a professional, and then, for some of us up to the heights of our stardom, and that path is pretty similar for all of us, so, I like that. Now, with that said, I grew up with, again, Kiss was a big influence. I love these larger than life rock star kind of bands, even Van Halen, the cover of the first Van Halen album, man, is like, see David Lee Roth, Andy. Yep. And then it's interesting that when I moved to LA and I meet Mustaine and we start Megadeth in 1983, there was a whole new thing happening right behind what was currently popular. And what was currently popular was Motley Crue, Quiet Riot, Rat, Wasp, kind of the big hair Sunset Strip, as we now call it. But right behind that, of course, was Metallica, Slayer, Anthrax, Exodus, Overkill, soon to be Megadeth. We were the next chapter of the rock and roll book, if you will, So when I got there, that's sort of what I happened to walk into, and so we created our own path. That was so funny because it was so different than, you grew up a Kiss fan with all the fantasy and the makeup and everything. Our genre was the complete opposite of that, right? It was more akin to punk rock, AC/DC, jeans and t-shirts. The guy on stage could be the guy in the audience. The guy in the audience could be the guy on stage. It was more Dead Kennedys, Black Flag, kind of West Coast punk. So, it was an interesting journey. And I think for me, it's sort of about being in tune with, when you walk into a room, read the room, that thrash wheelhouse was not one where you walk in with your hair up and your scarf around your neck and acting like some LA rock star. You know what I mean? This is one where it's like, hey, we're the boys next door who like to fucking plug in our guitars and play loud and rip and thrash and write killer riffs. And that's what it was, and that, again, let's face it, that was a derivative of Iron Maiden, early Def Leppard, Motorhead, the new wave of British heavy metal.
I know Metallica was influenced by Motorhead, to my understanding, and Dave Mustaine, of course, he played in Metallica. So I would assume that he had a lot of, influence on the direction that you guys went musically, or you say otherwise?
Dave? Oh, yeah, of course. Yeah, I mean, look, I was about 3.5, 4 years younger than Dave. I should say. And yet my experiences started about 3.5, 4 years before his did, I think he started to get into bands when he was in his mid-teens, 15, 16. I was in bands when I was 12, and so, I worked the circuit in the Midwest, which was ballrooms and some bars and stuff. And that was hard to work those places because I was underage, I could, night drinking was 19 was the age. And so I'd always have to have a sound man or somebody around us, light guy, sound man or something that was, old enough to sort of sign off on me and my buddies and my bands being able to be in bars, be the guardian. And, so what I think for me, when I saw the cover of Def Leppard's On Through the Night album, that was when those guys were very young. I think Rick Allen was only like 16. I think Joe Elliott was 19. Right? So these guys were very young. And when I saw that, for me, it was like, I can do this. Those guys are only a year or two older than me, and I can totally do this, and that was a real groundbreaker for me, so Def Leppard, as much as they became more of a pop act, the first On Through the Night and even High and Dry, those records were near and dear to me as a real force in my early music life.
Yeah. and your influence and your inspiration. That's awesome, man.
Mhm.
So you came from a small town, I guess, Minnesota. So we,
Yeah.
yeah.
hmm Yeah.
So how did you end up from small town Minnesota to LA?
Well, again, I think this comes back to our first question. The bass chose me. I didn't one day wake up and go, hey, I want to play bass guitar. Through a series of events of friends turning me on to rock and roll, hearing it on the school bus. Again, it was my buddy who had the BTO album. I went over to his house, and as soon as I opened it up, I went, I want to do that. And, so that started the crumbs that created the path to where I would go. And like you, I ended up going to I went to LA sort of as a backup plan to go to Musicians Institute. When you get into your junior and senior year of high school, you start looking, all right, what am I doing? Am I going to college? Am I going to school somewhere? What am I doing? Am I going to stay home, work on the farm? Yeah, I mean, my dad did that. My dad, he was born in 1925, and his class in school was the first class to go all the way up to 12th grade. Everybody before him, I think they went up till 8th grade, and they had these little country schools out in the country, in the countryside, and you'd go to 8th grade, and then that was it. As long as you learned to sort of read, write, arithmetic, who needs anything more? You're going to take over the farm, and that's what you're going to do. You're going to run the farm. So he was the first one that went up into senior year, 12th grade. In fact, I had his math teacher or his English teacher, and that's how long this lady had been teaching in the school. And he was the first one of our family who had aspirations, and I think even went to the University of Minnesota for a short while, and then he had to come back and run the farm. But I think in the Ellefson family, there's always this push to for progress, to move things forward. My family were successful in the farming business. They were successful in cattle trading, and that whole thing through the Midwest. So I grew up with that pedigree around me, that wasn't music based, but my dad understood business, and I think that's what was implied into me was, do whatever you're going to do, learn the business, learn your industry, learn your business, be aware of what's going on. And that runs kind of contrary to sort of the sex, drugs, and rock and roll, and we don't care, and everything's, we can do whatever we want, that kind of mentality, right? So there was always a balance in there with me, with musicians, to go, okay, because I practiced and I got pretty good pretty quick. And so I knew, my skills as a player were as long as I kept at it, would be more than enough, and they were. So when I got to California and I meet Dave, we get into Megadeth and start that whole thing. I think for me it was, I admired Dave's instincts because he was a city kid. I was not. So I had a lot to learn about the city, and he was for sure a big brother for me with that. At the same time, I came from a good family. I had a strong father figure. I had a lot of these other things that, Dave didn't grow up with. So it was that's, I think, where there was a good partnership. We filled some sides on both sides. Yeah, that were good. And, look, Dave had a skill, and a gift, I should say, to compose songs that, were worthy of being world-class songs, and I'd been with enough musicians to know that that's not easy to do. I'd written my own songs to know that to find that craft is really, it's a unique thing, right? And he had it. So but between the two of us, we had different roles in the group, and that for sure helped with that. And I didn't end up going to school.
Did you go to Musicians Institute or?
Musicians Institute is where I was going to go. Years later, in 2005, I ended up enrolling in college, and I ended up getting a business degree. And then I did a year of a seminary degree, which I only did a year of it. I didn't graduate from it. But, so I've done, for me, those things were more about adults, higher learning education, and then along the way, look, I've always practiced. I've always studied under people. I've taken lessons from various people to just learn more about different instruments, like from piano to bass to all kinds of different stuff. So yeah, it is. I mean, if you want to make this your life's, a craft, a craft is honed. It's not just one and done. You know what I mean? You're always, working on it.
I've been playing guitar for my whole life, and I'm always learning something new, taking lessons from whoever, just to learn something different. And it doesn't matter how good that you get. It's just something that I think as a musician that really drives us, and that, if you're really passionate about it, you're just constantly wanting to improve on your skill.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when you're creating yourself, do you lead with feel, technicality, or concepts, or do they all arrive together?
I don't even think about it. Honestly, I'll pick up an instrument. Sometimes I just noodle around a little bit, and maybe I come on to some little movement that happens, and well, that's kind of cool. Like even today I was playing something. I was just kind of sort of moving my fingers around the fingerboard just to warm my hand up a little bit. Because it's kind of like before you run, you should walk, you should stretch a little bit, right? So before I go into really ferocious ripping bass lines, I do just a little bit, even if it's just kind of, just sort of walking my hands along the, fingerboard, just to warm it up,
Yeah.
And,
Just nice.
Yeah. You went to school, right? So just little things that are just, it's not academic. They're, you can do them like, look, I'm sitting here talking, having a conversation, and I'm doing it. This kind of stuff you could do while you're watching TV.
Yeah, but it's
it's just
good to warm up,
Yeah, it's just things to keep the muscle moving.
Yeah,
and then
do you stretch before you play?
No,
no,
not really.
No,
I mean, look, if it becomes too much of a ritual, that kills the creativity, in my opinion. To me, creativity happens. Some days I'll walk by this office, I'll see my guitar, I'll pick it up and go, I want to play, and there's something calling to me, and I just pick it up and strum the guitar. I got an acoustic over here in the corner, and get the piano in the other room. Some days I'll walk past the piano and go, you know what? Let me flip the lid open and sit down and just play a little bit, and it's just kind of a yearning to just sit at the instrument for a bit, right? And sometimes nothing happens. Sometimes I just play the same old stuff I've always played. And sometimes because I haven't sat at the piano, for instance, for a minute, suddenly my hands go to different places. I'm like, oh, wow, check that out, Yeah, so, creating is that. Now, look, I'm also learning some songs for some performances. So that's a different modality. That's I need to learn. Let's say, for instance, I've never heard the song, or it's been a minute, right? I have to kind of relearn just listening to it as a fan, kind of getting it in my head, just listen to it a few times, then pick the guitar up or the bass and kind of start learning. Oh yeah, that's right. That's where the notes are. And then I got to learn the form. Okay, that's right. It's 2 times in the intro, 4 times in a verse, 4 times in a chorus, re-intro, back, then say, you know what I mean? So I learned the form. And lots of times I'll write those out. I'll make a little chart just so I have a roadmap. So as I'm learning a song for a performance is an entirely different thing. Because then you have to sort of digest it, get it into your from your head to your heart, because up here is to memorize it, up here is to know it by heart. And when I'm on stage, I don't want to know it up here. I don't want to have to be thinking, oh my God, that's right, it's 2 times 0. I want it down here in my heart, so I can play, I can rock, I can be a performer, because people aren't paying you to stand there like a statue. They want you to be performing.
I totally agree with you, dude. I seen a band, and I'm not going to name them, but holy shit, they were so boring. You could tell that they were bored to death,
Yeah.
And if a band is bored to death, I mean, it definitely reflects on the audience. I don't care, because I played in thrash metal bands, and it's about high energy and put your 100% into it when you're playing. And that, you're going to get, that feedback from the audience. And And I went and I saw this band. I swear to God, I slept through the whole show. First time ever.
Well, at least they put you to sleep.
Yeah. Oh my God. It's a
It's-
very, very popular band, but I won't mention their names. And they were just, you could tell they were bored to fucking death and that they didn't even want to be there. I like that attitude because your fans follow you and they're there for you and they're supporting you. And, you know, when you're out there, it's a privilege. It's a blessing to have that opportunity to share that gift with other people. And you always want to put your 100% into it. One of the best bands I've ever seen in my entire life that had done that was Scorpions. I saw them, I swear to God, this was like in the 90s, early 90s when grunge was kind of taking over everything. And, you know, so there wasn't like anybody showing up for the rock shows. And I swear there must have been like 1,000 people there. And they put on a show as if there was none, the way that they played. I never forgot that, you know, and I always incorporated that into my own live performances as well. Or somebody like Kiss, you know, for example, they go out there, they put on a show. You know, you want to see a show.
well, put yourself in the audience position because, you know, when I'm at a concert, I was just at a big concert the other night. There's 10,000 people there, right? Yeah. And yeah, it was cool. It was exciting when everybody's cheering and everybody's part of it. I mean, they were really into this artist, and it was great, right? Reminded me of Kiss and things like that when I was younger, right? It's kind of a Kiss of this younger generation. But you know, the truth of it is, if I was the only person there, I would have had the same experience with that show because I felt like they were performing for me, right? So I think the trick as a performer is to perform for the audience of one, if you will, right? And the audience of one can be sort of your higher power, that guy, that little kid inside of you that just wanted to go rock. Maybe it's for your wife or girlfriend. Maybe it's for, you know, whatever. You know, I remember when my son was first born, I went on tour. I kind of felt like I was doing everything for him. You know what I mean? Like, you know, rocking out for, you know, because he was important to me and I missed him. I was never home. You know, I was always on the road, cryptic writings and stuff, right? So, you know, so I think when you've got that singleness of purpose to perform like that, you know, that will always, I found that will always focus me, even if there's, you know, a 20 people or 20,000, you know, because when you're performing to a whole bunch of people, just the mood of the event can sometimes elevate the excitement, right? Because of everybody's sort of raising the bar around you. You know, people are screaming, they're singing, they're, you know, whatever. So, you know, performance situations, again, it comes back to what we talked about. Read the room. You know what I mean? And, you know, audience of one, I think has always been a good philosophy.
So how do you approach it whenever you play? Live or?
Yeah, I mean, look, first of all, I always say a little prayer, even if it's just, oh, God, please help me. You know what I mean?
Dude, I swear to God, I do the same thing, man. You know, I'm like, well, I'm always like, God, you know, help me to do the best of my ability. That's all you can do. You know?
I figure, look, as we started this conversation, you know, music is sort of this divine calling that we have. And, you know, when you're called, that means you're being led. You're not being driven, you're being led, right? So even though you're in a forward motion, the motivation behind it can be very different. If you're driven, it could be like, I'm going to fight against all odds. And that's what it is for some people. And that's fine. It's not what it was for me. And it's still not. You know, to me today, the phone rings, I say yes. They lead me to where I need to go, whether it's, you know, a record company or a producer or somebody or another musician calls, says, hey, you want to write some songs, you know, whatever. So I think, you know, knowing that it's a divine thing, you know, for me, as I've, you know, in my last few decades, it's been more about, all right, God, how dare I go into this without bringing you along, bringing an awareness to me. It's like, hey, thanks for putting me here, and every gig is just as important as the one before, again, the big gigs are fun. The big gigs are fun, of course. They're cool, they're great. But those little gigs where you're just performing for a handful of people, again, the person at the 100-seat club, they paid the same amount of money as the guy standing next to him, and they want him to be entertained just like the guy next to him, you know what I mean? So it for performers, when we get caught up in, well, how much money do we make, or there's not enough people here, or why are we playing this small little freaking shithole club? Like, it's like, well, because that's what you're worth in that town, right? Or maybe it's an intentional underplay. It's a warm up for something bigger coming up. Doesn't matter, right? But you're there for a reason, and so get on with the reason is how I always look at it.
It's a good attitude. That's good advice for upcoming aspiring musicians, and I love that attitude. Thank you very much. What's probably the most difficult song that you've ever played with Megadeth? Personally, I would think on bass it would be Falling Words. You play that with a pick?
Ironically, it's not, because it's riffs that, and I always learned the guitar riffs in Megadeth too, which always helped me when I was composing bass lines. It also helped me sometimes better play the bass lines, because sometimes, like Holy Wars, there's not much room to do much else other than play the guitar riff. It's just one of those compositions.
Yeah.
Probably one of the other more complex songs to play was Hangar 18. And a lot of it is because of the string, that you're jumping strings, right? And
Can you show that really quick?
Sure. So it's like it's
very cool. So some of that stuff is really complex,
Yeah. Then you got to get back up to this octave.
It's awesome.
So there's a lot of that string jumping.
Yeah.
That stuff is more complex because of, and again, it comes back to just doing some warm-ups, getting your hand ready to go into battle, I'm just warm.
That's what I was going to ask you, because the impression I get from what you're saying is that, when you're being creative and when you're actually getting ready to perform, it's like you have two different approaches. When you're being creative, it's more or less inspiration at the moment. You're not thinking about, technique. You're not thinking about, specific rituals or anything like that to get you into that mindset. But when you're ready to perform, you're focused more on the technique. Am I on the right track?
Right. Yeah. I mean, you're on the right path. Yeah. It's creating is about sort of turning the brain off.
Yeah.
It's about just letting your heart, letting music pass through you. I always say songs are right out here. Can't see them, but they're right here. So the goal is let them kind of channel through you so that they come out as, our job as players,
yeah,
whatever your instrument, is sort of to take what's hovering out here, bring it into your spirit, your body, and to go through the mechanics of the human condition,
yeah,
and mold it into something that comes out sounding like Hangar 18. You know what I mean? So that's less brain, and it's more about the heart and the feel. And then when you go in the studio and you need to record that and really execute it, yeah, that's a time to practice the motor skills, get your guitar, get it positioned right, in the hand position. I've got one of these little things down here, like a little stool,
yep,
where, I put my foot up on it,
actually,
because
right now.
Yeah, I mean, it helps position the bass a little better, so it's like,
it's pretty cool. I can't hear it, but it's pretty cool.
Yeah. So, like all of a sudden everything's mechanically right where it needs to be. Right. So I can play. And sometimes, you'll play a part and you're just fucking honed in, man. And it's physical. It's like an athlete, learning how to
Yeah, exactly.
throw a pass. You're just repetitive motion. You just do it over and over and over, until you get that motor skill down, and then that becomes second nature. You're not thinking about how to throw the pass; it's just natural, So
like second nature. Yeah. Were you ever an athlete yourself?
I was a little bit. I got more athletic in my adult years, quite honestly. When I got sober in 1990, I got a lot more engaged in sports, really through Nick Menza. Nick was very athletic. He was kind of came a little more wholesome from his family and stuff. So he was into, like, he started taking me to the batting cage. We would play tennis when we were recording the Rust in Peace album. Me and Mike, the producer, Mike Klink, and Nick. He got me into mountain biking and stuff. So I got a lot more athletic. I never did things that would hurt my hands, break a leg. I never got into skiing and snowboarding and all that kind of stuff. I don't like the cold, to be honest with you, that much. But I never did things that would. I remember when we were writing Euthanasia, we were outside the studio throwing the football, and Dave threw the football to me, and I didn't catch it right. It came spiraling in, and it jammed my finger, and it broke my finger right here on this first joint. So I actually ended up having to get my finger splinted and taped up to finish the writing, and then going into even the recording of the record. I don't know that we started. I think we recorded yet. I think we were starting to demo. We were starting, but we were in the process of making the album, and I had essentially a broken finger, and that just taught me, it's like, man, stay away from, football, anything that's going to hurt me, man. It's not worth it, man. It's just, I can't do it.
The reason why I brought that up is because I noticed being an athlete definitely helps when it comes to being a musician too. Like for myself, I was an athlete before I was a musician, and it teaches you, like, drive and pushing yourself beyond your limits. And the guitar, or the instrument, it's a performance, and it's pushing yourself sometimes beyond what you think that you can do. And like if I'm playing a Dream Theater song, I really, really have to do a good job, and it's very technically challenging. Or like you said, Hangar 18. Oh my God, the guitar solos to that are like ridiculous and difficult. So that's probably one of the hardest actually for me to play too. Now you played with some of the greatest guitarists, alongside like Marty Friedman and Dave Mustaine. Who left the biggest lasting impression on your music? Anybody?
I've gotten to play with a lot of great people. Andreas Kisser comes to mind. We do Metal Allegiance together. Before that, we had a band called Hail. We were kind of really one of the first sort of famous metal guys playing metal covers. And I think what impressed me about him is he would walk in, plug into a Marshall, turn it on, and just dial a tone, and his volume was always up here, right? That's the volume that everything rose. And I was just not even 11, but certainly 9.5. You know what I mean? Like it was pushing the limits, right? And it always impressed me that I remember asking him one day about turning down or something because we couldn't hear the drums or something. And I remember he just looked at me like, what? Like, turn down wasn't in his vocabulary. And I admired, I guess I just admired that he was so confident in his playing, that he could play anything. He's a fantastic player. He's even a really good singer, but he really just was so sturdy and so solid as an individual, as a musician. And between his Brazilian Portuguese and my English, there was never a communication issue, but we sort of you learn to sort of speak intuitively through people when say English isn't their native language and Portuguese isn't mine, right? You sort of have this unspoken communication, and that was probably the first time that I had that experience with somebody. And I guess, look, I guess I had it maybe a little later. I had it. Maybe it was right before that. I forgot. Also with Max Cavalera, who's ironically my neighbor here in Phoenix. We live not far from each other. But I played on a couple records with him. We did some touring together, and it was the same thing. There was this unspoken communication that the best way to communicate is not through your native tongue of speaking, but through your music. Yeah. And I've had the same experience now with the Dieth guys, because Guilherme's also Brazilian Portuguese, and the other guys are Polish. So I've enjoyed that in my more recent years, is having that relationship. Because you find out, first of all, we're all the same, right? We're all rocker kids, metal kids that grew up loving, we share the same record collection. We share the same kind of hopes and dreams of our bands and our music careers. So that's something that was impressive to me, and again, look, Marty, of course, fantastic. Marty, the thing about Marty is he could land on any note, whether it was the right note or not. His ear was so good. He could and he could always bend it into something. Yeah. And that was super impressive, that his ear was quick and he had a really good instinct, to sort of make anything he played become super musical and interesting. And, Chris Poland is the same way. Chris is a guy who can plug in his guitar at sound check, hit one note just to get a tone and dial his amp and his pedal board, and everybody in the room goes, what is that? Who's that? And it's so impressive when someone does that, because it's not like they have to play this flurry of notes. They can just hit one note, and it's like their soul is singing through that note. And I think that's been a real musical education, and you can't go to school to learn that. That's something you learn on the gig.
Or somebody like B.B. King, who just, one note he can make.
Well, he was the most famous for talking about it. Yeah. And obviously he meant it. And for certain listeners, he was their guy. He was not my guy. The guy that did that for me are guys like Chris Bolan, Andreas Kisser, Marty Friedman, these guys, one note, you know what I mean? And also to play one note and know exactly who it is. Go, that's Chris Bolan. Yeah. Like, holy shit, yeah, that's Marty. You know what I mean? Like, that's, how cool is that? To just be identified with, because what you're hearing, but what you're hearing isn't their guitar playing. You're hearing the essence of who they are, and it's just coming through a guitar, right? And when I read these Eddie Van Halen books like Eruption and stuff like this, and even Alex Van Halen's book, they talk about that. Eddie was not a verbalizer. He was shy in a lot of ways. But when he played that guitar, man, everything that needed to be said came out of that guitar. And it wasn't the guitar. It was just, that was how he best expressed himself. Some people are great podcasters. Some people are great authors. Some people are great speakers. They can stand up in front of a room and talk. And others of us find it through the gift of music.
Now, your current work and creativity, you got a new album out with Jeff Scott Soto, which is called Unbreakable. It features Andy Martin-Gelli, Paolo Caridi, and guest spots from Tim Ripper-Owen and Laura Gilden. I think I said that right.
Yeah, Goldemond. Yeah, from Burning Witches. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
So how did this lineup shape the sound and personality of the record?
Well, the lineup, Andy and I start writing everything. We have Paulo always track the drums, at least in the last couple albums we've done together. And then it comes this point where we get with Jeff, and where we're ready to start bringing in, the vocal component, the melodies, the lyrics, the storytelling. I ended up writing a lot of the lyrics. The three of us write a lot of the melodies. Andy wrote a lot of melodies, vocal melodies on this record as well. Andy's a fantastic composer. He's got a great ear. He's got a younger ear than me and Jeff, which is cool because he's in touch with all the old guard from Judas Priest to Steve Vai to all those guys, but he's also in touch with young modern metal and rock music. So he's got the kind of the whole spectrum, right? So I think there's that process that happens. When it came to the guests, Vengeance that Tim Rip Rowan is a guest on. To me, it just sounded right. When I went down to see him and KK when they came through town, I asked him, and he was, Tim's so cool, and Tim is, man, on that KK's Priest tour, he was just singing the best I've ever heard him sing. Man, he looked great, he sounded great, and he was so gracious to agree to do it. And then and Laura from Burning Witches, Andy knew her. I'd seen them perform on Monsters Rockers, so Andy suggested, so we reached out to her, and she kindly agreed to do it as well. And it was cool because, for someone like that, somebody not as maybe in our inner circle, to come into something sort of strange and unknown, like, okay, she knows who we are. She's certainly a big fan of Jeff's work. I mean, Jeff is pretty much an icon to all those power metal singers, and so to come in and it's like, okay, what am I walking into? Like, what is it, right? So when she heard it and she got into it, she took her time and she asked for the time, and we were able to give it to her. We weren't up against some hard deadlines, so it's nice that we were able to give her the time so she could really mold it how she wanted. And man, what she brought back to us was so great. Not only trading the verses, but is complimenting in the choruses was super great. That song, Poison Tears, it's one of my favorite ones on the record. I love all of them. I mean, it's to me, Unbreakable is one of these records. When I listen to it, every song, like, fuck yeah, this one's good. Oh my God, I forgot about how good that one is. Yeah, this one's cool. I go down the list, and it's nice that when you look back on your own work, that it still has that effect on you. That it wasn't just sort of, well, that's what it sounded like. That was the 2 years ago, David Ellefson. It's like, oh no, that's very much today's David Ellefson for me, and Jeff, that it's still got a very fresh feeling to it.
That's awesome, man. Now, you guys, fans recently got a 17-minute track-by-track breakdown of the album.
Yep.
Did revisiting each song that way reveal anything new about your process or connection to the material?
We shot that clip about a month ago when we were all together in London. So I think for all of us, we had to go back and kind of revisit the songs ourselves, right? Because by this point, the record has been kind of done. As far as the mixing and everything, we finished all that up in February. So, you kind of go back in time and revisit some of the lyrics, you revisit the mood of the song so that you can talk about it like we did on that video link. And, I think for me, it takes me back in time to what were we thinking when we started creating it? Where were we at when we were finishing it? What new unexpected things came into the song that we could have never seen coming? Because that always happens when you're creating something. And so I think that was kind of the fun part of going back and, doing that little video interview we did with ourselves, because it allowed each of us to go back and, kind of reflect on those songs and the album as a whole.
So you have Kings of Thrash fall 2025 tours coming up.
Yeah.
It's gearing up for a Thrash in South Cali in September.
Yeah. Yeah, we got Southern Cal and Arizona in September. We got Florida and East Coast Midwest in October. We've got some other things that'll be announced here shortly as well. So yeah, the the phone's ringing for that band, and things are. It's fun to go out and do that because again, that's my way to go back and revisit, the Megadeth stuff, and have good memories about it, and the fans love those songs. It's fun to play them. So, look, that's always going to be part of my life, that stuff, So for me to go back and pull those out for the fans is the fun of Kings of Thrash.
Part of your legacy, man. And
yeah, for sure.
Hear that you're playing with Jeff Young again.
Yeah.
Jeff Young, Chaz, Leon, and Fred Aiken. Jeff was the former guitar player of Megadeth. Which albums were he?
He was on So Far So Good and So What. He did the album and the tour.
You also have guests like Chris Paul, as you were talking about earlier, who's another former Megadeth, and bands like Death Effects and Gravel. What do these collaborators bring to the live show for you?
Well, those are support acts. Those are support acts for the tour, for their territories that they're in. Getting support acts is a couple of things. One, look, everybody's got to bring something to the party. You know what I mean? There's no free ride, and that's how it was for us. It's like when Alice Cooper took us out in 1987. Well, we're on Capitol Records. They're spending money on the album. We got a couple of songs on MTV. We're bringing something, right? We're bringing something of value to the tour, right? So, any band that's on a bill has to do the same thing. And your viewers, or listeners, if you're in bands, in order to get to play with a cool group when they're coming through town or to jump on a tour with them, unknown bands, it's hard. That's why sometimes headliners take buy-ons, to have people buy onto the tour because, the stage is like you said earlier, the stage is a privilege, you know what I mean? And it's not owed to any of us. And if you've done the work to build your career and put bodies in the building and butts in the seats, as they say, you've earned you've earned the privilege of being there, and, part of it too is opening up the opportunity for other bands to get introduced to your audience.
Yeah.
And so that's where the other bands come into the mix, is they're, we're allowing them to have that opportunity. And
exactly,
and it's fine. That's what this whole thing is about. So everybody, we try to get people that we think are a good fit with us. They bring something of value to it, so that the whole night out can be an enjoyable event.
Keep that same vibe, that energy level. And it's a privilege. It's an honor, man. Now you got the Dave Ellefson show. As you in the interviewer's chair, shining a light on peers and pioneers, what's been the biggest revelation about the art of conversation from that role reversal?
That's actually a good question, because it does shift. When you're the one used to doing the interview and talking, first of all, there's this thing about letting the guests talk, right? And in order to get them to talk, you have to ask the right questions. You have to get them engaged. So I always do my research, even if they're friends of mine. I always, research. Okay, what are they doing now? What would they probably be happy promoting? Because to just sit around and have conversations, we all got better things to do, right? We're all busy. So it's like, what are you working on now that you'd like to tell your audience about through our show? A lot of these people are friends of mine that I go back in time with. Chris Poland, Gary Holtz, for example. So I can go back in time and talk with them about fun stories that our fans and our viewership really love. We've kind of become this go-to thrash metal podcast, and that wasn't really. We didn't start with that being the goal, but that's kind of where it's gone. We've got these artifacts and these stories that are just such gems, for our fans to sink their teeth into. So for me, it's always about conversations, musicians having conversations with musicians, because me and my co-host Josh Fatumi were both bass players, and we didn't start it like that. I didn't know to the degree how much he was even really wanting to play that much. And now all of a sudden he's in Primer 55. They've got tours and shows and all kinds of stuff, which I'm super happy for him about. And, you know, so it's, I met Josh, he was a podcaster, and we'd done a couple of podcasts together. And so it's even our friendship has developed and morphed and progressed into, you know, a new kind of friendship as well.
For you, already having that experience with a lot of these guys as friends helps too, you know, so it's more conversational, and that's basically what I try to go for. The Bass Warrior Tour blends music and storytelling. What do you hope fans will walk away with after experiencing it live?
Well, I've got two of these. One is Bass Warrior that I do across Europe, usually in the spring. That's a bit more concert driven. Andy Martingelli is my musical director for that. So we, you know, we'll go out and we'll play stuff off of the Ellefson catalog, even some Ellefson-Soto stuff, even though Jeff's not there with us. And then I have Bass Story, which is what I did in Connecticut last week. That tends to be the storytelling, you know, it kind of started as a clinic, then a storyteller thing, and now it became more performance storytelling. And, you know, I go through my discography, you know, I play obviously some Megadeth stuff. I'll go back to the, you know, Van Halen, Kiss, you know, things that inspired me. You know, we do a little tribute to Ozzy and Black Sabbath, of course, you know. So, you know, that's pretty fluid. It can kind of move around and morph around, and I like it to be just a night of fun music for everybody.
For aspiring musicians coming up today, what's the best advice you pass on about building a lasting career in music?
Well, the thing is, I think it's important you know, when you're starting out, you need to kind of play with a bunch of people and be pretty wide, because you need to learn about the language of music. You need to learn about your instrument. You need to learn about performing. And, you know, writing, recording songs is the music business. Getting on stage is the entertainment business. And while you may bring your songs with you on the stage, when you're on the stage, you're really there to entertain, right? And when I always say to people, if what you're doing on the stage is making people come closer to you, keep doing that. If what you're doing on the stage is making people walk away from you, do something different. You know, it's again, read the room, right?
Dude, that's funny. Sorry. That's funny, but true. All right. Out of everything you're involved in right now, which project feels like the truest reflection of who Dave is tonight?
Well, look, the Ellefson-Soto record is one of my favorite records I've ever done. And I know it's easy to say that, oh, my newest record's my greatest. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying it's near and dear to me. It's a collection of ideas, songs, lyrics, music that reflects a lot of things in my life that I've always wanted to say. And I think at this moment in time and with this group of musicians, I was finally able to say it, you know, and Jeff was able to sing the words that I want to say.
That's awesome.
And musically, I think we have really crafted this tapestry of music that it really weaves a cool story. It's a great narrative for this record. And I think Unbreakable says it all. You know, that to me, the cover art, the lyrics, the word itself, just everything about it is bold, it's punchy, it's in your face, it's unapologetic. And that to me is all the hallmarks of a great rock and roll record.
Dave, thank you so much for joining me, man.
You're welcome, John. All right, John, have a great one, buddy. Thank you.
Thank you, man.